Look, Harvard has been a disaster. They're taking $5 billion, and I'd rather see that money go to trade schools. And by the way, they're totally anti-Semitic at Harvard, as you know.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday temporarily suspended entry of international students wanting to study or take exchange programs at Harvard University. The suspension will last 6 months, but could be extended. Trump's order also directs the U.S. State Department to consider revoking academic or exchange visas of current Harvard students. Trump signed a proclamation citing national security concerns as the reason behind the move. His 2-page order accuses Harvard of having, quote, a history of concerning foreign ties and radicalism and extensive entanglements with foreign adversaries. It specifically named China.
A judge blocked the latest move by President Donald Trump to bar international students from Harvard University. The president signed a proclamation stopping foreign students from getting visas to attend the university.
They're cutting a ton of medical research. The hit to the economy from kicking out these international students will be billions of dollars. This is a cornerstone of the economy. This feeds into the labor market. It feeds into jobs. And it's again, this anti-intellectual spree.
These measures are targeting not only the students who haven't arrived yet, who've been admitted but are still at home packing, planning to go to college, to start their doctoral programs, but also students that are into programs they've already started.
Turkish student Rumeysa Ozturk has thanked her supporters after being freed from a detention centre in the US state of Louisiana. The PhD student at Tufts University was arrested outside of her home near Boston in March by US immigration officials. She spent 6 weeks in custody.
People are truly panicking because they don't know whether they will be able to come back next semester, whether campus is going to look the same. Because without its international students, Harvard is not Harvard.
One of the world's best universities, a magnet for the globe's brightest brains, is under attack by the Trump administration. At the same time, foreign students coming in and out of the US are scared they'll be arrested at the border and end up in some gulag somewhere. What does this have to do with New Zealand? Well, those students have got to go somewhere, right?
We aren't the destination market for the best students in the world. But if the place that is the destination for the best students in the world suddenly says we don't want them anymore, my God, we ought to be ready for that.
Kia ora, I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, Donald Trump is burning down America's foreign student income. Could New Zealand be warming its hands on that bonfire?
We could be doing well while doing good because international students pay about 4 times as much in tuition fees as domestic students. It's amazing that America is throwing all of this away.
Look, we would love to be able to attract more students, and what we do know is that students value certainty, and right now there isn't enough certainty around the US.
International students are moneymakers for universities and for the country. We've nearly, but not quite, recovered our numbers after COVID, but maybe here's our chance to surpass them. Dr. Eric Crampton is the chief economist at the New Zealand Initiative, which describes itself as a pro-free market public policy think tank. He's written a newsroom piece suggesting that New Zealand can profit from America's university turmoil. Oh, and he's not from the US.
That's true. I'm Canadian. I did spend some time in the United States on a student visa. I did my graduate work at George Mason University outside of DC. So I was on an F1 student visa from 1998 through 2003. Well, slight tweak on that. I got my green card in 2003 because I married an American. But I had been on an F1 before that.
So you're writing about this. Where does that come from? From your personal view, or is it something that you've been really interested in?
Well, I taught at Canterbury for about 11 years before I shifted over to the initiative as a think tank. We always welcomed exchange students. They were wonderful to have around. Foreign students always helped to pay the bills. And I just imagine myself back when I was a student on an F1 visa and looking at what's been going on with the American administration, putting basically every student visa under threat. So there are erratic threats that come through from the president. Sometimes it's one university or another will no longer be allowed to have international students, and they might have to decamp at short notice to some other university. Other times it's threats that students from China might not be allowed to continue to stay in the United States on a student visa with weird allegations that they're all spies or something. And when you live in America on something like a student visa, every interaction with the States, you're reminded that you're less than an American. Here, I'm still a permanent resident, and it's fine. In the United States, if you're not there as a citizen, even in 2002, it was very clear that you were there by their sufferance. It would be awful being there now on a student visa, because just imagine it. You're paying $50,000 US per year in international tuition fees. Maybe you've already paid for 2 years of studies and you're coming towards the end of your second year and you've got 2 more years ahead of you, depending on whether you want to go on to grad school, it could be more. If they cancel your visa, you've wasted $100,000 in 2 years. Maybe if you're at a place like Harvard, people wouldn't hold it against you. You could continue your studies elsewhere. People would say, well, he was admitted into Harvard, he must be really good, and take it on that basis. But if you're at a mid-tier US university, which is still better than anything New Zealand has, you'll have sunk 2 years worth of study and $100,000 worth of cost, and you won't be able to finish your degree. Maybe they'll come up with some online offering, but it won't be nearly as good as a real on-campus presence. And it feels like the kind of spot where New Zealand could help, where we've always been able to accommodate students on international exchange or just on study abroad. A student on study abroad comes in, they're not pursuing a New Zealand degree, they could credit New Zealand courses back to their home market degree or whichever university they're at. We could make it really easy for students to come in that way, and then if things don't normalize in the United States, to continue their studies here as a full international student, transfer the degree over to New Zealand with the New Zealand university recognizing the work that they've already done in the United States.
But Eric says some of a student's decision will depend on how far along they are in their studies and at what university.
If I were at a top-tier university in the US, I would be trying to stay there. I'd be trying to complete my degree. I'd be keeping my mouth shut, trying to avoid drawing the eye of Sauron, finish up the degree, and then go on with my life. If you're at a mid-tier university, you have to decide, do I want to live like that for another couple of years, or do I want to shift camp, go and do study abroad someplace that's sane, maybe consider going back to the United States if things normalize there, or transfer the degree over to a place like New Zealand or the UK or wherever else you might be able to. Europe might be able to accommodate, the UK probably can. Canada and Australia have been limiting international student numbers, so it'll be harder for them to scale up in response.
And what do you think it is like for those people at the moment, mid-study period, the ones who are just keeping a low profile? Are they likely to be targeted in this sort of war?
It's hard to say where this will all land. So President Trump has said, for example, that Harvard will no longer be able to register international students and that international students there will have to shift to another campus. Then there are lawsuits stopping him from doing this, and who knows where it will all end. He has similarly made threats to Columbia University. Columbia and NYU are the two biggest hosts of foreign students in the United States, and they, on their own, those two universities have 1.5 times as many foreign students as all of New Zealand put together. Okay, so that's just two universities.
Wow.
There are an awful lot of students there who are in very precarious situation. It would be great if they all knew that it'd be very easy for them to cash in their F1 student visa for a New Zealand student visa, make that really easy for them, that they could come in as study abroad, that we wouldn't limit the duration of their visa to that study abroad period, but make it easy for them to extend it to shift to a New Zealand university, if that is what felt safest for them at the end of the study abroad period. It would let them know that there can be a safe haven in uncertain times. We aren't Harvard. We aren't going to attract a student who could be at Harvard. But think about the numbers here. There are something like 1.1 million foreign students in the United States overall. Oxford and Cambridge, maybe the University of Toronto, Singapore National University. There are lots of universities that are well ahead of New Zealand in the rankings. Australian National University. Canada has been restricting the number of students who can come in on an international student visa. Australia has been doing the same. Oxford and Cambridge, the LSE, they can only take on so many students. And If New Zealand doubled its number of international students, that would still just be 1/10 of the number of Chinese students currently in American universities. There's something on the order of 278,000 Chinese students at American universities. New Zealand has about 25,000 international students in the country at all of the universities. So we don't have to be attracting all of the students. We couldn't possibly do it. But we have ample capacity to help, and we really ought to be.
And I'm presuming this would be a fairly easy thing for immigration to do and a safe thing. If they've already been vetted enough by America, then they're a good bet to come into New Zealand, right?
It seems pretty obvious, yeah. I'm pretty confident that Immigration New Zealand could scale up to handle this. It seems an obvious opportunity. I'm not sure why we're not already doing it.
Have you heard anything about whether we might be doing it?
It seems like everything is ready to go. So it's from what rumblings you hear around Wellington, Immigration New Zealand could handle this.
Is there the willingness to handle it or to embark on it?
I think that it depends on students putting in the applications, and that would require us telling them, hey, New Zealand's ready for you. We're happy to help. And that would be some mix between University of New Zealand and the universities themselves, and perhaps the government. But it'd be, of course, a little risky for the government. They don't want to be annoying Trump because that's also risky.
Sort of more profitable perhaps to do it in a low-key way, like when those students are looking around for alternatives, just to quietly put your hand up.
Or the universities themselves doing it rather than it being a government-led effort. We note that when Trump started making his threats against visas for Chinese students, I think it was Hong Kong University, very quickly, very loudly said every Chinese student should come and try to get into Hong Kong University instead. They were standing ready to help those students out. We could be doing similarly. An additional opportunity here is that, at least from my time when I was in academia at Canterbury, we had some really good foreign students. But the very best from China, just like the very best from New Zealand, will go on to study in the United States. We aren't the destination market for the best students in the world. But if the place that is the destination for the best students in the world suddenly says we don't want them anymore, my God, we ought to be ready for that, because you can have a step up in the caliber of students who come here to study. And that can have self-reinforcing benefits because it would improve the quality of our offerings here. You could offer a higher valued product. You might be able to attract better academics because of the better quality of the students. They'd tell their friends. That builds a pipeline. We'd really be shooting ourselves in the foot if we didn't take this up.
Can I just take you back a little bit?
Sure.
What sparked Trump's war on universities? Why is he like this?
They've been deeply enmeshed in culture wars. So Trump sees the universities as ideological enemies. The universities in the United States have not been great at avoiding politicization. So they've often been very much on one side of the culture wars, and that isn't the side that Trump is on. It's pretty dangerous for institutions that depend on federal funding or exist at the pleasure of the administration through various regulatory edicts and decisions around immigration. It's a mistake to get offside in that way. It's become very politicized, and now Trump is beating them up with a big stick. It's incredibly damaging. It's a powerhouse for American R&D. They bring the best minds into America. A whole pile of America's Nobels are won by people who were born abroad and then came in to the American universities. That's all being burned down. It's tragic. It stems from America's culture wars.
In 2024, international students contributed more than $3 billion to New Zealand's economy, and the numbers are climbing. Universities New Zealand Chief Executive Chris Whelan says our 8 universities have 20,000 full-time equivalent students.
Look, international students help, but they're just one of a number of different mechanisms that universities, are looking to for making payroll and keeping lights on. We don't want to grow too far. We want international education to be a genuinely quality and value proposition for both domestic students, giving them the ability to be able to rub shoulders with people from different cultures, but also for the international students to give them a genuine New Zealand experience. So, to actually end up in a mixed class where they can also rub shoulders, with New Zealanders.
Chris Whelan is unsure of how likely it is that foreign students would want to detour from Harvard and head our way.
But if any student did want to, or was forced to discontinue their studies in the US, there are places like New Zealand that I think would welcome them and would make it as easy as possible for them to get here.
Have you had any indication from immigration here on what that attitude is?
We've had some informal conversations. Because everything's moving so fast, we just don't have certainty about what the future direction is at this stage. We haven't taken it too far, but there seems to be, genuine willingness and interest in saying, well, look, if there are more students that are interested in coming here, whatever the circumstance, of course we'll make it as easy as we can for good students.
What about New Zealand students who were going to Harvard, perhaps on a scholarship? Say if they haven't started yet, they're not halfway through the studies, what's your recommendation there?
Look, we're leaving it to each individual university to work with their own students. Obviously, there's massive uncertainty. Students will be hoping that things sort themselves out in time for them to travel and begin studies. Otherwise, they'll be looking at alternatives like, can they just simply defer their study abroad experience for another 6 months and just see what the world looks like. But for us, it's really good to have young New Zealanders going out into the world, building relationships, seeing, how other countries work, and then bringing that back here.
Gosh, how many New Zealand kids will have their plans disrupted, do you think?
I don't know the exact number, hundreds.
Cohen Humana is one of them, a scholarship student currently studying neuroscience at the Ivy League school.
It's been a nervous time for a Harvard international student the whole semester, I think, since the election. So there's always that nervous energy walking around campus, and it's sad to see some other fellow students be affected by this. So I know there's a lot of people that have already gone home and are wondering if they can get back in the fall.
I mean, how disappointing to be accepted into one of the most prestigious universities in the world and then to find that you're sort of an unwelcome visitor.
Look, absolutely. And I think it's something that we've heard, repeatedly over the last few months. Everyone likes policy certainty. If you're a young person, you're committing to one of the biggest investments in your life, 3 to 4 years of your life, usually a large amount of money, you want certainty about what you're going to get.
With some of these students, if they've been accepted to Harvard, and with the United States screening the way it is, how easy will it be for them to sort of go to somewhere like Cambridge or Zurich and say, look, I don't want to go to Harvard, it's scary there. Is there a place for me at your university?
Look, I think it's going to depend country to country. At the end of the day, if you've got a student visa in the US, I suspect a lot of other countries will go, actually, we're willing to put you through a shortened visa approval process, just doing the bits that perhaps are unique to a country like New Zealand or the UK that the State Department in the US wouldn't have already done.
What bits are they?
So for New Zealand, it would basically be financial evidentiary requirements. As far as I can tell, pretty much everything else that New Zealand looks for would have been covered off by the US State Department. But here, we look to see that students will have enough money to be able to support themselves while they're living and studying in this country.
Would other international universities pick up those Kiwi kids on the basis that they're good enough to go to Harvard?
Look, I think they would. But again, it's going to be case by case. So every university will have, a limited number of places. And the highest quality universities, the ones with the greatest international reputation, those places will have all been taken. So a lot of it's going to come down to the individual student, and what they want.
Have you got any insight as to what might end up happening in the American situation?
None at all. Every week it's different, and we're watching and waiting.
But what are New Zealand universities actually doing?
Look, we're talking actively about this. We are, to some extent, waiting to see, because it's changing so much so quickly. We don't want to leap into one space and suddenly find we're working in a different space a week later. I think, there are a few key things that we're looking to see how they resolve. Things like the next, Harvard court appearance date on the 26th, I think it is, of this month, and things like the decisions around the the additional social media screening that'll be done for visa applicants, they're the sort of things that until we know how they land, it's very hard to know what to do.
For students who will graduate at the end of this year, maybe they're doing, Cambridge exams, maybe they're looking at, topping the country. Has America become an unattractive destination, or is it still outweighed by the quality of the education they'll get at places like Harvard?
What we know in general terms is that students are very sensitive to a whole range of factors. And not the least of which, for New Zealand, one of the attractions here is that, our universities are all high quality, that, people are able to work while they study, and we do, for degree holders particularly, offer up to 3 years of post-study work rights. That makes us quite an attractive destination. For the US, it's a different set of considerations. It is the ability to be able to study at a world-ranked US university, get a US experience, but that will be measured against things like it's now harder to get post-study work rights there, and that it's harder to get visas there.
Is this short-sighted of America? I mean, a lot of these top students start up businesses and end up making a fortune for themselves and the country.
Look, I can't speak to the US, but what I can say in New Zealand, we know that roughly about 16-17% of our international graduates are still here in this country working 5 years after they've graduated. It's about 17%. And of that 17%, 10 in every 11 are in highly qualified jobs that require degrees, that are high skill, high value. It's great for countries like New Zealand. I can't speak to the US, but I'm guessing it's exactly the same value proposition there.
So, New Zealand's academic arms are wide open to students who no longer want to go to America, but we're not thinking as hard about the issue as, for instance, Germany.
So a few weeks ago, there was a suggestion from Germany in response to some of Trump's threats to Harvard, where again, Trump was threatening Harvard that they would not be able to have international students anymore. Germany had offered to basically build a branch campus in Germany for Harvard so that they could have it as an extension campus. All of Harvard's foreign students could head over to Germany, study there under the Harvard emblem. Germany would get the benefits of having a lot of smart people around. The students would be better off because they would still maintain a Harvard link and would be outside of the spot where Trump could hurt them very much. It is a reasonable proposal. I don't think that Harvard has gone ahead with that as yet, but it was neat to see them thinking entrepreneurially in that space, that they saw an opportunity to do good for those students and to do well for Germany at the same time.
Could we do that?
There'd be more upfront cost in doing something like that. It would be a little bit more challenging administratively. We have existing channels to accommodate students through study abroad, where we've done that for a very long time. Universities know how to do this, and our immigration system is used to that as well. We could accommodate them within existing universities, and they would, through that mechanism, maintain their link to their home institution while deciding whether they wanted to flip over to being a New Zealand student. That's probably the easiest path forward for us, but if a U.S. university wanted to set up a branch campus here on that basis, absolutely, we should be enabling that.
Nobody really has suggested that, have they?
No, but nobody has suggested it to Germany either. Germany saw a way to help and suggested it. New Zealand universities could wait around and see whether students that would otherwise be going to the U.S. for the U.S. fall semester start putting in applications here, whether students that are currently in the U.S. start making application to New Zealand for study abroad just in case, or we could be more proactively making clear to those students, hey, New Zealand is an option. We'll make the immigration process real simple. We want to help. We can be a bolt hole for you for the next year. And if you decide that you want to stay, we'll make that easy too.
Chris Whelan, not so sure about such a scheme.
Look, that would be a pretty significant and major investment. I don't know whether that's viable. I don't know whether that kind of money sits around. It's not on the table at the moment.
Any other similar sort of inventive schemes that you could work to take advantage of the situation?
Look, our job is to communicate, to let people know that we have a world-class university system. We are a safe and welcoming country. There are huge opportunities from getting a degree here, so we will absolutely be making that case. but I'm sure we'll be making it alongside, every other English-speaking country, that tries to attract international students.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. Thanks to Dr. Eric Crampton and Chris Whelan. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite anō.